In today's video, I want to show you how to use underglaze transfers. Now, underglaze transfers are a special item that are essentially a transfer paper with already printed out underglaze images on them that you can easily transfer onto your work for really nice images like this. They're very easy to use, but there is a small bit of context that you're going to want to know before you use these. Number one, this is an underglaze transfer. There are multiple different types of transfers. There's underglaze transfers, there's glaze transfers, there's even overglaze transfers. What we're working on today are underglaze transfers. They're all relatively used the same, and as long as you follow the instructions, you ought to be okay, but they are used in different phases. For example, underglaze transfers like this can be used in the greenware, which is unfired pottery, and the bisqueware phase, which is pottery that's gone through the cycle once already, and all the water has been chemically driven off. So this is a much drier product than this is here. While things like overglaze transfers usually go into a third firing in the final product. This means that I can put those transfers on stuff like this, already finished pottery. If you're wondering about any other type of transfer other than the underglaze transfers that we're going over today in this video, I will put a link down below to a website that will give you instructions and most likely a video of their own. But in today's video, we have the underglaze. Underglaze transfers are an excellent way to get a crisp, nice, clean image on your work without the hassle of drawing them yourself. And there's so many different distributors that sell them. For example, the one that I usually buy from and get mine from is called Elan Transfers. Elan Transfers is a wonderful source for your transfers, and they often have a very wide variety of different underglaze transfers. I am not sponsored by them, I just like them. With that being said, let's get into what you're actively going to need to do your underglaze transfers. Number one, it's heavily suggested that you have a leather hard to bone dry product. This here is a bone dry product. It is as dry as it possibly can be without the help of a kiln. You need something that's relatively dry because you're essentially transferring all the underglaze from this top layer down to the bottom layer as it soaks up through the clay body. It's really difficult for the clay body to soak stuff up if it already has moisture in it. So try not to do this technique or use underglaze transfers on something like super wet or even leather soft clay. That stuff has too much water inside the clay body to actively soak up this underglaze that'll be transferring into it. And you're often just going to smudge it anyway, so it's better to have a drier product like leather hard. The second thing you'll need is your underglaze transfer. Now keep in mind you will want to get underglaze transfers. What I'm showing you here today will not be the same way you would use an overglaze transfer. So make sure you get underglaze transfers. They often also come in multicolors. The ones I prefer are just black and white, but you can buy different colors. The links will be down below. You're also going to need a clean source of water along with a sponge. It doesn't really matter what type of sponge you have. I have a bunch of these mud tool sponges here, but just don't use the giant painter sponges here. It's going to make your job a little more difficult. Just get yourself a nice little throwing sponge and a little bowl or bucket or whatever you have of clean water. Make sure it's not clay-filled, silica-filled water. I've made that mistake before, and it often messes up the transfer. One last thing that's often suggested is to get a rubber rib so that you can push down on the underglaze transfer. I often find that the way I do it, I don't need an extra rib to do that, and sometimes I end up tearing the paper, so I just don't do it. If you learn patience in 3rd grade, it should be easily doable without the use of a rubber rib. With some of those clarifications out of the way, let's get started. Step number one is find your underglaze transfer that you want to use. I'm going to save this one for a special occasion, and I'm going to use one like this. Secondly, usually you don't have a piece this big. This is a very large piece of underglaze transfer paper, and most of us don't want something this large. So you can very easily get a set of scissors and just cut out the space in which you want to use. That's why I have a bunch of these little spaces cut out. It's because I only need one of these images at a time. Also keep in mind that these are technically single use, so once you use them, the paper is essentially gone. You get one image per transfer. There are people out there who can double up, but I'm not one of those people. That's good right there. We can keep this, fold up the rest of it very nicely, make sure it's nice and flat as you can possibly get it, and put these away somewhere safe and dry. Once you have your underglaze transfer, you want to make sure that the ink is facing down. There's a very clear side that's the front versus the back. This is the back, and it's pretty obvious which one is the front. You want to put the front side facing down on the work, on your leather hard or bone dry clay body. Just like this. Make sure to spread it out and hold it very evenly and still. This is one of the reasons why I heavily suggest you have some type of surface so that you can kind of prop your stuff up like this to make it comfortable for yourself. So maybe it kind of stands like that all on its own. Now that you have your underglaze transfer in place, make sure to hold it down as flat as possible with your fingers, get your source of water in your sponge, wring out the high majority of the sponge. You don't really want it soaking, you just want it damp, and you're going to press down firmly, without pressing too hard, on the underglaze transfer, making the water go through the transfer and onto the bone dry or hard wear. Now for your first pass through, you're going to see a pretty obvious darkening of the image, and that's pretty normal. But as time goes by, you're going to notice that this is going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. And as it gets lighter, that's a good sign to apply not only more pressure, but a tad bit more water. I will often do this about 5 or 6 times before I take it off. I want the cleanest, crispest image that I can possibly get from this transfer. So you can probably see the comparison. You can see that it's getting pretty light right now as the color starts to get less and less dark. Now that I add more water, you'll see it'll darken up again. This is a pretty good sign. This is a sign that the underglaze is actively transferring onto the clay body, and the clay body is actively soaking up the moisture that you're giving it. And that's what's soaking through and transferring this underglaze. But by the time it loses its color, you want to put another layer on. I usually repeat this process about 5 or 6 times, and just to make sure, I usually do this for about 5 minutes at a time. If you do it too quickly, you might get blotches, or you might get spots in which the image doesn't transfer all the way. I want to make sure that the image is completely transferred, so I definitely take my time. It's a good trade-off for the intricacy that the image actually provides. I think that's enough, so let's take the transfer paper and slowly peel it off. That's a clean image right there. That's pretty good. Keep in mind these transfers are essentially one-time use. If you try and use them a second time with the same transfer, do you see how the color is much less dark? There's not enough underglaze in there to actively continue to transfer a second time. These are essentially single use. And while people do use them multiple times and might like the faded effect, the majority of the time if you try and use it a second time, you don't really get the same crisp image whatsoever. So I heavily suggest after this, you take this and put it in the recycling or wherever have you to dispose of it. Another big potter tip is that some of you, much like myself, are going to get impatient after a while. You're going to get your transfer, put it down, you're going to put water on there, like this, and you're going to notice the darkened color. And you'll let it soak. And after it soaks and dries up a little bit, you'll do it probably one more time. And you won't put pressure, and you won't do it maybe the 5 or 6 times that I would do it while I did these steps that I showed you previously in the video. If you do this way too fast and you don't do it correctly enough, we only made 2 passes here, you often get a very blotchy and splotchy product, and you didn't transfer the rest of the ink from the transfer paper onto your work. I want to stress to you that underglaze transfers reward patience and pressure. Those are the 2 things that really make a difference in between a crisp, nice image like this butterfly we did and a blotchy moon surface like this.
Now the main problem area is up here.
For a little while I thought I had these down pat, so I would just like get a transfer, put it here like this, and I thought, oh, if it's all about moisture, why don't I just give a little one of these, and just push pressure down real hard. That'll do it, right? No, it never works out like that. You really have to be patient with these. One major potter tip here is that if you don't want to use this on leather hard or even bone dry greenware before it goes in the kiln, you can always do it on bisqueware. Be aware though that if you put it on greenware and then put it through the kiln, that color and that underglaze from the transfer is cemented into the clay body. So after you put this transfer on there, it can't be wiped off. If I fire this right now and it goes into the bisque phase like this will end up staying on this image forever and ever. I actively, unless I sand the crack out of it, can't get it out. It's a little bit different on bisqueware, however. Bisqueware is already a different animal essentially. Stuff like this can be wiped off and put on and wiped off and put on over and over again. If I wipe this with even the wettest of sponges, I technically might get the clay body a little wet, but it'll soak right in, go away in no time, and I'm not really losing a lot of clay or clay particles while I do this. But if I do this on greenware, if I keep rubbing right here and I want to rub the transfer off, I will technically lose clay over time. This doesn't happen when I do something like bisqueware. Bisqueware, no clay comes off. You can also use these underglaze transfers in the bisqueware phase. Just use it exactly how we did on the greenware phase, and you should be good to go. I personally think it works a little bit better in the bisqueware phase, but the trade-off is that the color is not cemented and I can easily wipe it off after I put it on. You can see the transfer disappearing from the actual paper and going on to the bisqueware. It's a little magical. Like, I can tell that it's done here, but you can put a little more here, and as you do it, it transfers through, and it slowly becomes less and less dark. That's clean right there. Oh, almost dropped it. A couple of common questions that are usually asked in regard to underglaze transfers is, Dante, can I glaze these any color I want? You technically can, but the high majority of people that use underglaze transfers like this will glaze anything that the transfer is on with a clear gloss glaze. These types of glazes are clear enough to see the images through the actual glaze, and because of that, you want to search for a family of glazes that's either in the Celadon or maybe in the clear gloss line, something like that. Please do not make the mistake of grabbing something like this and assuming that you're going to be able to see this through this. Usually doesn't work out too well. Make sure you grab something that has good translucency like a Celadon glaze or even just a clear gloss glaze. Thing number 2, what's the benefit of putting this on greenware versus bisqueware? There's not really a benefit, realistically speaking. I just prefer to do mine on greenware because once this comes out of the bisque, this can no longer be affected. I can wipe this off as much as possible once I fire this to the clay body, and then it stays there, which means I'm free to work a little bit more haphazardly. This here, however, if I do it in the bisque, I have to wait a little bit to glaze this because I've introduced a lot of water into the clay body, and I also have to kind of tiptoe around this. Now when I glaze this, I have to make sure that the clear gloss glaze is here while any other colors are either inside or right here. I have to be a little more careful, and sometimes that's just not how I work. But technically, you can do them in the bisque or the greenware phase. It doesn't really matter which one you feel like doing, just do one. Dante, where should I store these? You should store them in a nice, safe, dry place. The second you get any of these wet, they start to transfer. And because of that, they will often lose their potency. If I cut this off here, let's see, I have so much, and this little piece here accidentally falls somewhere like this, this is now ruined. This is no longer going to work. It is now a non-usable thing. These things are essentially one-time use, and we have to use water in order for them to transfer. So be extra careful where you put your silk screens while you're working and where you store them, especially if you live in a more wet place that rains more often. For example, I should 100% not have them just laying around next to a puddle of water over there. Well, thank you, potters, for joining me today on a video on how to use underglaze transfers. This is probably one of the 3 most common types of transfers that I know how to use. I think there's glaze transfers, there's underglaze transfers, and there's overglaze transfers. Overglaze transfers are essentially like lusters in that you fire them a 3rd time afterwards at a much lower temperature. I prefer underglaze transfers because they give me a really crisp, intricate, steady form to put on my pots so that I could have that intricacy put on my pot for me instead of doing it by hand. Also, I'm a potter and I don't know how to draw, so the problem is that if you're not patient whatsoever, there is a spot where you can mess up very, very easily and you won't know why. You'll read the instructions and you'll say, I've been following all the rules. No, you honestly need to be a bit more patient with this in order for it to work crisp and clean in this way. With that being said, remember to hit all those YouTube buttons, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.